Hello everyone. Time once again to discuss the next phase of your final project and how to approach it. So by this point, you should have developed a fairly detailed outline for your project. It should also incorporate quite a few different references, certainly go well beyond your textbook for this one. And I'll provide you with some additional sources at the end of this segment as well, but you should definitely be finding your own sources on top of what I may provide. Plus, some of the sources I provide might be a little hard to find. If you find them, great. If not, continue searching on your own. The Keiser library has a number of databases, EBSCOhost, ProQuest, etc. Are great ways to do that. Ideally, this is the end of week number 3. We have 1 week to go, so hopefully you've scratched out at least a rough draft of approximately the first half of your essay, if not the whole thing by now. The final project is 20% of your course grade, so give it your best work, your best effort, and definitely don't skip the project. And as always, use descriptive headings and subheadings. You should definitely have a title page for this one. Brush up on your APA formatting skills if you're a little rusty on those. For this live chat, we will focus on the third section of the project, loan policies and risk management. Some of the key issues leading up to the 2008 financial crisis include the pre-crisis banking environment. The banking sector experienced an unprecedented expansion in mortgage lending in the early 2000s, buoyed by rising housing prices and an aggressive pursuit of market share. Subprime mortgage expansion also played a role. Banks significantly lowered lending standards to offer credit to subprime borrowers, evidenced by the increase from approximately 8% of total mortgages in 2001 to over 20% by 2006. Securitization and misplaced reliance on ratings played a factor. The practice of securitizing mortgages into mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations obscured individual loan risks, as these securities receive high investment-grade ratings from credit rating agencies despite the underlying risks. There were also inadequate risk management practices. Banks' risk management systems failed to effectively measure the risk exposure to the housing market downturn, with many institutions holding substantial positions in mortgage-related assets without adequate hedging measures. Banks' high leverage and liquidity management. Leading up to the crisis, banks operated with high leverage, with major investment banks holding leverage ratios of 30 to 1 or higher, which made them particularly susceptible to mortgage asset value declines. Derivatives and off-balance sheet entities were yet another factor. Financial derivatives like credit default swaps were extensively traded in the run-up to the crisis, while off-balance sheet entities like structured investment vehicles concealed the extent of banks' risk exposure. Loose monetary policy and regulatory failures. The Federal Reserve's loose monetary policy and the lack of effective regulatory oversight created an environment conducive to risk-taking in the banking sector. Loan policies also impacted the financial crisis. These loan policies, characterized by high-risk lending and inadequate risk assessment, directly contributed to the magnitude of the financial crisis when the housing bubble eventually burst. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, it was soon revealed that many of the loan policies and risk management strategies employed by banks prior to this event were largely inadequate. Consider the Federal Reserve's interest rate policy. In response to economic downturns, the Federal Reserve reduced the federal funds rate significantly from 6.5% to 1%, between 2000 and 2003, intending to stimulate economic growth by making borrowing more affordable. The influence on mortgage interest rates. As a result of the lower federal funds rate, mortgage interest rates also declined, reaching historically low levels. This led to increased affordability of loans for a broader segment of the population, which on the surface sounds like a good thing. However, the market dynamics of supply and demand are always in effect. The affordability of loans due to lower interest rates spurred greater demand for housing, resulting in a rapid increase in home buying and an associated rise in home prices as supply struggled to keep up with demand. Insufficient risk mitigation policies. The period leading up to the financial crisis saw banks, mortgage lenders, and investment banks operate with inadequate measures to manage and mitigate the risks of issuing subprime loans. The rise of subprime lending. Subprime loans are characterized by higher interest rates than prime loans and are extended to borrowers typically with poor credit histories or other factors that increase the likelihood of loan default. Many lenders chose to also write excessive amounts of subprime loans with little thought or concern about the ability of unqualified borrowers to repay those loans. And of course, there are consequences to this type of risky lending practice. The aggressive extension of credit to subprime borrowers without sufficient consideration for their ability to repay led to high default rates, as these borrowers were more vulnerable to economic fluctuations and interest rate resets. A reckless lack of stringent credit criteria for borrowers allowed people to take out unsustainable loans without having to provide much evidence that they could also pay them off. It was also common for banks to bundle these loans and then sell them as securities. This allowed the banks to spread the risk across multiple investments and avoid direct responsibility for their lax loan standards. Instead, lenders quickly sold off these sketchy loans to Wall Street investors, passing off the associated risk to the investment world as they pocketed even more mortgage processing fees as a means of easy revenue. The eventual defaults on these subprime loans were a critical factor in the cascade of events that led to the financial crisis, as they undermined the value of mortgage-backed securities and contributed to the collapse of numerous financial institutions. Investment banks played a significant role in enabling the risky behavior of banks and mortgage lenders. Derivative investments and public sales. Investment banks contributed to the financial crisis by creating and selling complex derivative products such as mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs. These are derived from pools of mortgages, many of which were subprime. These securities were often marketed to investors as high-quality investments without adequately disclosing the risks associated with the underlying loans. The investing public subsequently, and often unknowingly, took on the underlying default risk associated with thousands of subprime loans that were sold to unqualified homebuyers who would inevitably default on these loans and send the investment values plummeting. Inadequate risk management on balance sheets. On their balance sheets, banks held substantial amounts of these risky securities, reflecting a lack of proper risk management. The bank's practices, such as insufficient subprime underwriting requirements and inadequate allowances for non-performing loans, also known as doubtful or bad debt provisions, expose them to significant financial strain when borrower defaults eventually increased. The drive for profit and securities sales. The eagerness of banks to approve and underwrite mortgages was largely driven by the profit motive. often with insufficient due diligence on borrowers' ability to repay the loans. Once originated, these mortgages, regardless of their quality, were frequently bundled into securities and sold off to investors, transferring the risk from the banks to the broader market. As a result, the banks and mortgage lenders responsible for selling the faulty loans in the first place had conveniently washed their hands of the looming loan default risk. Impact of risk management. At the same time, banks did not have adequate systems in place for managing the risk of these loans that they elected to keep on their own balance sheets instead of selling them to Wall Street investors. This included lack of oversight and monitoring, meaning that problems could go unnoticed until it was too late. In addition, banks did not have effective strategies in place for dealing with loan delinquencies and defaults in a timely or efficient manner. The mismanagement of these risks by banks had a profound impact on the stability of overall financial systems. When the housing bubble burst, the drop in home values led to a wave of mortgage defaults, causing the value of the securities to plummet and triggering massive losses for investors and banks alike. Additional thoughts. The 2008 financial crisis was the result of these poor loan policies and risk management strategies. Banks were ultimately responsible for the losses experienced by investors as they had failed to ensure that borrowers could pay back their loans in a sustainable manner. The irresponsible commercial banks were further enabled by unscrupulous investment banks that agreed to bundle faulty mortgages into investment securities and foist these faulty loan investments on the investing public. This is why it is so important for banks and securities firms to have the right policies, governance, and strategies in place to protect against these types of events so they don't occur again. Ultimately, the 2008 financial crisis serves as a cautionary tale for banks when it comes to loan policies and risk management strategies. By understanding why these policies and strategies were problematic in the past, banks can ensure that similar mistakes are not repeated in the future. With the right policies and strategies in place, banks can avoid the types of losses experienced during 2008, protecting investors and keeping the banking system stable. Kagan, Singh, and Tardy are just a few of several references you may wish to locate and utilize to help you develop robust and meaningful content for your essay. See if you can also locate these references and use them in your project. Be sure to download this slide deck from the announcement so you can review not only the references but the content as well. You may also replay this recording as many times as needed to help with developing content for your final project. If you are viewing this session live, we have time for some questions at the end. As always, use the chat feature. Otherwise, reach out to me directly via email, text, or voice with any questions regarding the project or anything going on in the class. See you online.